facility in Darwin. For more, let's bring in our Saturday political panel. We're joined by Liberal MP Tim Wilson, and we're also joined by Labor Senator Tim Ayres. Welcome to the two Tims.
Good morning.
Thank you for having us.
I will have to use your surnames for this. So, Tim Wilson, I'd like to begin with you. Do you think the federal government could have done more to bring our stranded almost 30,000 Australians overseas? Could they have put on repatriation flights earlier, opened up facilities earlier, as suggested by federal Labor?
Well, what we needed was a pathway where we could return Australians and then have the facilities and the support to make sure that people quarantine. So if you just bring on flights without any pathway to do so, then you're setting people up for disaster. The reason we've faced this crisis, this problem around Australians overseas, is because Melbourne Airport was closed by the Andrews government, and we're in a situation where the second largest airport in the country has been closed to international arrivals. And as a consequence, it's been difficult to get the volume of people back in. Most of the burden has been on Sydney, and of course we've continued to put pressure on the states, particularly South Australia and Brisbane, or Queensland and Western Australia, to accept more. They've progressively done so, and now we've taken further steps because we want Australians to be able to come home.
But couldn't, if you had perhaps, say, resourced the states better with, say, ADF, they could have then managed the quarantine scheme at a greater capacity, because we know that there are hotel rooms lying dormant?
Politely, is this a joke? I mean, the Victorian government explicitly said they didn't want the ADF involvement. And that's one of the reasons why we've got a massive outbreak in Victoria, which has been very difficult to contain. The ADF has always been available to the states to do exactly what we need to do to support people in their arrival. It's been the states who have had their caps on the number of people they've been prepared to accept. And that's the limitation. That's why it's been so difficult. And now we're going to this extraordinary length of providing a pathway back through the Northern Territory so that we can get Australians home.
Tim Ayres, if we could bring you into this conversation as well. As Tim Wilson just said there, the Northern Territory has opened up the Howard Springs facility in order to quarantine returned Australians. Will Labor now be pushing other Labor states to do the similar action?
Well, the real question is, why has it taken so long? There are nearly 30,000 Australians who are stuck overseas and want to come home. That's caused enormous distress for families, particularly with young adults overseas who they desperately want to get home and haven't been able to get home. Mm-hmm. There is a real problem here with this government with recognising its responsibility to solve problems and setting out and doing the things that are required to make it happen. Now, this has been going on not just for a month, but for month after month after month. This problem's been absolutely apparent. It's a welcome development that this facility has been open.
But Tim Wilson does have a point there. Labor states have been pushing back, and they have not been wanting to take in international travellers. We're talking now about Australian travellers who want to return home. We see that Northern Territory has opened up a particular facility. Will Labor now be pushing other Labor states to also be opening up similar facilities to take in more returned Australians?
We'll be encouraging the government and all states. We unlike the Prime Minister, we won't engage in the hyper-politicisation that we've seen from Scott Morrison on these questions, where he points the finger at the Labor states and sends blame and opprobrium their way and has nothing to say about the Liberal states. See, the job of the Prime Minister is not to make an announcement about a national cabinet that now isn't national, isn't a cabinet, and according to last week doesn't meet. It's to build the consensus and the political leadership that's required to bring people together and to make decisions in the national interest. And this is just one more example of him being unable to develop that consensus because he hyper-politicises everything. Everything is about taking cheap political shots at some of the states whose governments he doesn't like.
Mm-hmm. Tim Wilson, if we can move on to this Trans-Tasman bubble, it's 2 days in the making now, and already we have Kiwis missing in Victoria. Can you take us through what you know about that, where the problems might lie here?
Well, to be frank, I don't really understand what the issue is. People in New South Wales New South Wales is accepting flights as part of the Trans-Tasman bubble from New Zealand. There is no quarantine obligations when people go from New South Wales into Victoria. There is in reverse. So once people have arrived here and have been assessed ultimately as safe, then the ordinary pathway is for people to be able to travel into Victoria if they wish to do so. So I want to know what the basis of, and it's not clear to me what the basis of, there's this new quarantine requirement to go into Victoria. I'm in the ACT right now. If I go to Victoria, I'm not expected to quarantine because it isn't a source of COVID-19.
But Victoria isn't currently accepting international travellers, so do you not see this as a failure at all from...
That's why the flights are going through New South Wales. There are no direct international flights into Victoria. To get into Victoria, you have to be part of a domestic flight.
So do you think that needs to be tightened up if you're confused, if there's confusion around this policy? I mean, we've got international people now coming in with this Trans-Tasman bubble, and then if they arrive in Sydney, they can go anywhere.
Well, but as far as I understand, that's fundamentally the point. I mean, the obligations are for people to quarantine when they come out of COVID hotspots. Now, I'm not the minister, so I've only read what's in the press this morning, but if you arrive into New South Wales or you live in New South Wales and you go to Victoria, you are not required to quarantine because you're not going from a COVID hotspot into an area that is free of COVID-19. It is the reverse when you are Victorian and you go into New South Wales. So I think this is up for the state government to explain why they're putting these new obligations on essentially what is domestic travel, because it doesn't apply to anybody else. So I'm curious as to know why.
Tim Ayres, are you just as confused? Is it a case of a confusing message, or is it the case as there is a flaw in the system here?
Well, I'll just make two quick points about this. Firstly, you're absolutely right. This is a very important development, the Trans-Tasman bubble. It needs to be managed well. There needs to be public confidence in it, and everybody needs to understand what the responsibilities are. And that's not happened in this case. Now, the Morrison government needs to act quickly to make sure that everybody knows what is happening here, everybody understands their responsibilities, and that people can have confidence in this scheme going forward. This kind of slippage, of a misunderstanding of responsibility between the state and the Commonwealth, a refusal to take responsibility from the Commonwealth, is exactly what led us to the Ruby Princess catastrophe, to an incapacity to be able to bring the states together to effectively execute the pandemic response. And it's something that the Morrison government needs to pay attention to and to fix.
All right, moving along to the other topic that has garnered many newspaper headlines and broadcasts this week is the investigation into disgraced MP Darryl Maguire, New South Wales MP. Tim Ayres, we might start this one off with you. The Premier has had a relationship with Tim Ayres, which has been disclosed. I mean, she's not the one on trial here. She was a witness, or not on trial, but under investigation. She's a witness, and she said that she had done absolutely nothing wrong. She said she stuffed up personally. Is that where it really should end? It's just a personal issue.
Well, even on Ms Berejiklian's own account, she has said to Mr Maguire when he's raised some of the dealings that he was engaged in, I don't need to know about that. Now that doesn't absolve you of responsibility. Clearly she knew about Mr Maguire's business dealings. Now, don't forget that this Liberal MP from Wagga Wagga, on his own account in the evidence in front of the ICAC, has been corruptly using his position as a Member of Parliament to enrich himself and to engage in business. And that had been going on for many, many years. Now, the ICAC proceedings will continue. But it is very clear that Ms Berejiklian has got some very difficult issues to confront. It's possible that it's entirely possible and consistent to be a person who's a good person and everybody likes, but but to have done something that makes you unfit for office. And these are very serious issues. You see the importance of the role of the ICAC in New South Wales at uncovering these issues. We wouldn't know about them if it wasn't for the ICAC and the ICAC's powers, and that's why federal Labor has been calling for a federal ICAC now for many years. Scott Morrison and the Morrison government claim that they've been doing the preparatory work for a federal ICAC year after year after year, and yet we see no progress on an ICAC to deal with the Commonwealth of Australia and Commonwealth MPs and Commonwealth public servants.
Just on that point, Tim Wilson, Attorney General Christian Porter had proposed a National Integrity Commission about a year ago, but it had been criticised for not having enough bite. Will that issue be revived again, and why won't the coalition set up a federal ICAC? One would think that setting up a federal ICAC would actually clear the government of any wrongdoing in the future.
Firstly, can I just say I don't understand why we're talking about Gladys Berejiklian and ICAC in comparison to the other issues. Frankly, this shows the Sydney centricity of the media. The biggest issue in Australia right now is actually what's happening in Victoria, particularly around the judicial inquiry not asking for key documents and evidence that have led to up to 700 deaths. And instead we're talking about an ICAC investigation, which frankly, Gladys Berejiklian, for starters, is a witness. She is not a person of interest of the inquiry. Secondly, it seems like the hearings were designed to humiliate her rather than to get to the bottom of it. The issues and the subject matter is a legitimate topic, but it should have been dealt with, particularly because of the private nature of it, in a closed hearing. We then saw, of course, leaked transcripts, which is another form of despicable behaviour. And your line of questioning politely is wrong. We have made it clear we're going to set up an integrity commission. We're going through the consultation processes. We've allocated resources for the job to be able, for a commission to be able to do the role. But we just want to actually have a substantial proposal before
us. Can I just ask, when will that happen?
Well, that, obviously the Minister or the Attorney General will outline that, but part of the point of going through a process of consultation is making sure we get it right and we don't either set up a kangaroo court or an agency which has no power or appropriate power so that can do what it needs to do.
Well, this is the problem, Fauziah. These guys, they make announcements and they never deliver. They don't like scrutiny. The Australian National Audit Office that has uncovered not just the sports rorts scandal and categorised that for the people of Australia, but also this latest Badgerys Creek dealing, where the Commonwealth Government paid $30 million for land that was worth $3 million. Someone's made themselves very wealthy at taxpayers' expense. The latest development from the Commonwealth Government in the budget was to cut the budget of the Australian National Audit Office, who'll now be doing 35 or 38 investigations a year rather than 48. Just when there's the biggest disbursement of Commonwealth Government expenditure into the economy, we're reducing the capacity for the Australian National Audit Office to scrutinise. This government doesn't like scrutiny. That's why they haven't brought forward the ICAC.
Tim Wilson, last word to you there on that Leppington Triangle, the $30 million parcel that was bought, valued then later at $3 million. It will be looked into at Senate estimates on Monday. What do you have to say about that?
Well, we'll wait and see what comes out in estimates, but the Minister had no knowledge of the decision. That's been consistent. But again, politely, the biggest issue in Australia right now is actually the Victorian Judicial Inquiry looking into the Andrews government. And at this point, you actually haven't raised one single question about that.
Well, we look forward to raising questions about that down the track. Tim Wilson and Tim Ayres, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.